everyone, welcome to this session of Collab Matters webinar. This is our third webinar of the series, of the 5-part series. The title is Speaking Together, Acting Together. Before we begin and jump into the discussion, I just want to give you some background on Saamuhika Shakti. Over the past 6 years, Saamuhika Shakti and Sattva Consulting has been deeply involved in facilitating collaboration among the 10 implementing organizations of Saamuhika Shakti. We work together to enable the waste pickers of Bangalore to have greater agency to lead secure and dignified lives. Sattva Consulting is the backbone organization, and H&M Foundation is the initiator and funder of Saamuhika Shakti. In today's session, Speaking Together and Acting Together, Designing Communication for Trust, Alignment, and Collective Action, we will explore how communication, when treated as strategy and rather than just a support function, builds trust, alignment, and shared identity within the collective, while strengthening legitimacy and influence across the wider impact ecosystem. For the discussion, we have Varinder Gambhir from BBC Media Action, Vivek Pradeep Rana of Gnothi Seauton, Hilmgård of H&M Foundation, and Sahana from Rohini, Nilekani, Philanthropies. We will have perspectives from partners in a collaborative, which is BBC Media Action in Saamuhika Shakti, funders, H&M Foundation and Rohini, Nilekani, Philanthropies, and an outside-in view from an experienced hand working with collaborators, that is Vivek. Before we jump in, just a couple of points to keep in mind. If you can add your name as well as the organization name, that would be great. And you can also introduce yourself in the chat box that is there. So that is available. If you can keep your videos on, that would be great. Happy if you want to keep it off, but we would request that you keep your audio muted throughout the session. We will have a question answer round, and that is for the last 15 minutes. And we will take those questions. But if you want to type in your questions during the webinar, that's also okay. And if the panelists here would love to answer them during the session, that'll also happen. All right. Okay. With that, let's jump in. Okay. Now, today we are here to talk about something that the impact sector often treats as an afterthought. It's, communications. And I have seen this personally because I come from a corporate background doing communications for the corporate sector, and with about a decade plus experience. And then I moved to the impact sector, and I've been in the impact sector doing comms for about the last 6 years at the Nudge as well as at the Sattva Consulting. In the impact ecosystem, what I see is that we spend enormous time designing interventions, building collaborations, and tracking outputs. But we rarely ask who's shaping the narrative, what do you speak, how do you speak, and where do you speak? And this is both internally as well as externally. And what does that mean for sustainability of our work? Good communications is not just about sharing a report or a status update. It's about bringing everybody together for a shared purpose. It's coherence between what we say and what we do. It's about building trust. It's about centering the dignity of the people that we work with. And critically, it's about listening as much as speaking. There's also a deeper layer. It's in a sector built on collaboration. Fragmented messaging weakens the collective effort. When each organization tells only its own story, we lose the power of shared narratives. But when we align around values, around the work that we have to do, around the lived experience we all have, we unlock that collective power and the collective strength. And the ability to shift that discourse, influence policy, and build legitimacy for the work. I think the collective comes through, and we have more power than just being an individual organization. So today's conversation, we will delve into answering questions on how do we make communications integral to strategy? How do we invest in it early? And how do we move from individual storytelling to collective narrative building? And how do we do this all responsibly with equity and with communities that we are with at the center? Okay, now with that, let's jump in. What we will do is we'll have about 3 rounds of questions. We will talk about internal communication, we will talk about external communication, and building communications strategy, and not just as an output or a status that we do. All right. Okay. Now, let's begin with internal communication. It's about inward looking, right? Like in a collective, every collective brings together like different mandates. There are different actors who are coming in. They have different ways of working. And suddenly we all have to come together and work together as well. And there are so much complex layers there because everybody has their own culture, their own ways of working. So when we have to build that internal alignment, it doesn't happen by accident. Internal communication is what enables all of the partners to navigate those differences, build trust, and make transparent decisions that will move us and help us all to progress together. Varinder, you have been with us with Saamuhika Shakti right from phase 1. BBC Media Action has been a partner from 2020. So I'll start with you as a partner in Saamuhika Shakti. What role did internal communications play in shaping this into a true collective rather than just a network? And like what practices helped like to bring that transparency and to build that trust towards shared ownership? And what lessons does that offer for others, who are coming into collaboratives or looking to build a collaborative?
Thank you. Thanks, Zibi, for that question. Thanks for having this important discussion and creating this space. It's great to be here and great to be with my fellow panelists. Also, a warm welcome to everybody who's joined in and giving us your time today. Quick heads up, I've got a sore throat today, and if I sound like I've swallowed sandpaper, that's why. Going to your question, Zibi, let me start with the obvious. I think amongst other things, Saamuhika Shakti worked because there was an efficient backbone. First Nudge Institute and then Sattva Consulting. And because we had a funder, I'm glad Linda is also here in the room with us, H&M Foundation, that trusted the partners, backed the approach, and also gave the collective room to learn and adapt. This really, really helped us create the right structures for it to work. But I have to be honest and say that, it's not that from the very beginning we were a collective, right? I think it took us a while. We were a group of good organizations working together, doing our part, but it wasn't that it all added up. The collective muscle really had to be built. And I think to your question, how it helped and what made the difference for us was really having this clearly defined shared framework, clarity on each of our roles, as well as the overlaps. So it was, again, the backbone really helped us align on it, though it took us a while, but, we came there. Partners all had to work also, on being explicit. What we own, what we don't own. And I think that's the second bit is very, very important to also notice that, it's also about being explicit on what you really don't own, right? Otherwise, we'll never be fair to each other. And where we really depend on each other. So that one thing was very important. Secondly, I think internal communication helped us in staying grounded. BBC Media Action always knew that, while we are working with, the social media users in Bangalore, it's the on-ground partners like Hasrudala, Sambha Foundation, and others who are bringing back the learnings from the ground. And, that we will be seeing what people resisted, what landed with the communities, what felt respectful to them. So I think it was very important to also root, like you said, Zibi, everything that we did in the collective was rooted on building base because dignity and in their lived realities. So, keeping that at the center. I think lastly, I would say it's also important to, have an agreement as partners on how each partner speaks as a collective about the collective. And I know, Zibi, how much effort has gone also from you and from other partners on, having that shared language. So I think being aligned on a shared public narrative that will help us frame it around waste because livelihoods and dignity was also really, really important. That also gave us, the freedom to express our own work in our own tone. So, while understanding that this is the shared framing that we are doing, and how we can also talk about our own work as part of that shared framing. So I think in all, the three takeaways that I would say from anybody who's building a collaborative something like what we've done on collectives, please treat internal communication as not just something like Zibi said, you're sharing reports or a means to update each other, but this is your decision making operating mechanism, right? So internal communication is a must. Creating a shared narrative internally is very, very important, and also giving expression to each and every organization's voice while keeping that in mind, and a disciplined feedback loop so that you're always being agile and learning and going back. I think these were the three things that really helped us in Saamuhika Shakti. Let's stop there. You're on mute, I think, Zibi.
Yes, always have to remember that. Yes, to your point, yes, I mean, when we all came together, we didn't have the name Saamuhika Shakti. And when we all got together, it was a shared decision to have Saamuhika Shakti as an umbrella name. And because each of our individual organizations come with its own, brand recognition and visibility and all of that, some with like 100+ years of work. So how do we come together as a collective, right? And so we all decided collectively that we should have a Saamuhika Shakti as an umbrella name. So thank you for sharing that. Linda, to you, as the initiator and funder of Saamuhika Shakti, you bring a different perspective as a funder here. How do you see that internal communications being that driver of change? Because you need to have, in a collective or a collaborative, all partners need to know what the work is happening, so you can collaborate. How do you collaborate if you don't know what is happening? Like, how do you see that, and what does it take to co-create that communication channels and norms, and how do you give that guidance and make that happen?
Yeah, so I think we've been funding collaborative projects over the last 5+ years. Saamuhika Shakti being one, and also Operaita in Bangladesh, which is centered around women garment workers. And in both these projects, I think that we've really witnessed firsthand what you're talking about, Varinder, about how the communication really is the infrastructure that holds the collaboration together in those projects. And collaboration might sound easy, and it's something that we talk about a lot, but in reality it can be super tricky and really, really messy, because you come in and you start working together and you have to create your shared language, as well as you mentioned, Varinder, and you have to have constant alignment, and sometimes very uncomfortable conversation, and also very intentional trust building. And I can really say that we've seen this in the collaborative projects, how we've really worked on the trust building between each other. And I think that is also key to why you have succeeded in working so well together. And I think also the shared framing that you mentioned, Varinder, is super important. The shared identity that you're creating as a collective, but also as any organization. If you have that shared identity kind of rooted in every partner or every person on board, it makes the work so much easier. I think that when you start moving away from talking about your own contribution and my project, and instead talk about our impact and what we're doing together, that is a kind of sign that you are moving towards that collective power and another type of dynamic. And I think for us, as a funder, it's about also understanding our role as a convener and catalyst, and really letting others also have mandate to take the decisions, and also understanding that there is a learning curve to this, and it needs time to be able to also develop and grow organically within the collective itself. I guess for us, that also means understanding that we need to kind of take a step back and discuss, what does flexibility mean as a donor? What does it mean to work with trust-based philanthropy? and how can we really support the collaboration that is happening and create space for others to lead, basically.
So true. I think one of the things that I really appreciated, and while putting the communications mandate for Saamuhika Shakti, was H&M Foundation giving those guiding frameworks, but then you let us learn ourselves, and you gave us that space to be able to build those mandates and guidelines, like what work for Saamuhika Shakti and partners, our lived realities, what is here in India and in Bangalore, what works for us. And there was, and that was something that we really appreciated and continue to appreciate. So yes, thank you for that trust. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sahana, I think from your viewpoint as a funding organization, right? What do you think? Where do collectives struggle internally most? Is it setting up baselines for transparency? Is it creating those spaces for decision making where everybody's coming together, and everybody has an equal voice? And how do we make those platforms available? How do we share that knowledge and make it happen?
Yeah, thanks again for having me here, and it's great to be in the company of the fellow panelists. Building on what Linda and Varinder has already spoken about, some of the challenges around trust building and shared identity, I think collectives at large and very much in the space of communications, the struggles are often the same. One, there is the power imbalance that often are visible in collaboratives where either larger NGOs who are well-funded, who have already got visibility, or if there is a funder in the collaborative, maybe not the ones who are in this panel, but dominate narratives while grassroots partners remain underseen or underheard. So there's the power dynamics that plays at large. If we go back to the basics, while we know that communications or storytelling chops in the sector is still in a development phase, like as communications as a valuable function in the space is still gaining that importance, at least in India. Especially organizations, NGOs who might be in rural areas, while they have solid stories or storytellers, they are not equipped with doing that with mainstream media, perhaps, or in platforms like, events or speaking on stage. There are different challenges that some of these organizations might have. Internal communications is further fragmented in countries like India, where there's language diversity, there's gaps in digital access. So that continues to be another problem. And I think this is both a challenge and also a solution, is where how are governance structures kind of put in place? How are agreed decision-making processes? Who speaks and when? Are you speaking on behalf of somebody? Are you translating, and what is getting lost in that translation? Because that then leads to mistrust or even silence or disconnection from partners in the collaboration. So I think if you were thinking about communication equity, if you were to kind of frame it that way, it must be designed, and it must not be assumed that just because we've come together, things will fall in place. So what are these platforms that you require for intentional governance? Is there like a rotating spokesperson, when you're representing Saamuhika Shakti, say, for example, who's representing? Can we do that as a rotating role? Multilingual channels, we are all kind of English first, but what are the multilingual channels that are there, or a different language around as the primary language? Will all ensure that partners come together meaningfully. I think from an internal comms, also safe spaces where people can either, share dissent. What is the way in which conflict resolutions happen? Before it goes into public messaging, how are you communicating your internal newsletters or internal emails? Is that bilingual? Is that only on email? Is WhatsApp, because that's more, what are the different channels? Because channels matter equally. Not everybody is accessing all these channels. And I think to sum it up, to kind of center lived experiences in some way over institutional voices, because there's also friction between that. How do you resolve that to ensure there's a shared identity? Just to give an example, we fund a coalition called the Living Labs Collaborative, which is in the Northeast, which is an interdisciplinary on-ground practitioners who converge on ideas and action. Not necessarily that they're all working in the same space, but they're working on problems of the region. So in that case, we've seen that there is, like how Sattva works, there is a secretariat that kind of enables these, but ensuring that there are conversations, these difficult conversations happen upfront, so that then your external communication is strengthened, is my response to your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing it. I think there was a lot of takeaways from that answer. I mean, especially in a country like India, with the language part of it, and access to those platforms becomes a huge hindrance to building trust and transparency, of course. And how can we make sure those barriers don't exist is a key component to collaborations and collectives working together. Yeah, definitely. To you, Vivek, I think we have talked about trust and identity and shared communication. I think one of the things that you emphasized to me when we were talking earlier was how much internal communications also is important for morale building and to keep our collectives moving forward, because we need to be able to inspire us, especially in like long running collectives. Maybe, for example, after like 5 years, 8 years, are we making the impact? Could you just unpack that for our audience, Vivek, with your experience of running internal comms for, or creating those frameworks for collaboratives?
Yeah, thank you so much, Zibi. I think it's a very important area that most people don't sort of focus on. Communication is seen as more tactical. Let's get this done, let's get that done. But this goes to the very fundamentals of how humans behave, right? So, I mean, simply put, if you don't really drive communication in a manner that motivates people, people just stop showing up fully when they're not visible, right? It's as simple as that. We experience it every day at work, in every other situation. And in collectives, because of the very structure of how we operate, visibility is never guaranteed, right? And therefore, the anchor gets seen, the funder gets seen, but a small partner, as Sahana was saying, who may have actually solved for the real hard problem on the ground, nobody mentions that. Nobody calls it out in any big way. And that begins to sort of eat the individual away. And I've seen that very often, because very often the person at the podium is not the person who's done the work. And the person who's done the work is never the one who's given credit for all of it, right? Because then it becomes a collective credit that's taken. So I think there is the real sort of focus that one should be is about how deliberate we are with what we do with our internal communications, right? So if our internal communications can create deliberate, intentional spaces where voices can be named, heard, and credited, I think it will really sort of address things significantly. And I can give you an example of one of the collaboratives we worked on. It had, I think, 18 partners, apart from 5 funders involved there. We were facing a similar challenge. Everyone sort of felt they weren't getting the necessary due. So we had a great anchor who sort of ran this, and his idea was every weekly call that we had, we would set aside 10 minutes for one partner to talk about one story of change that they sort of witnessed or impacted. And I think in about 2 to 2.5 months, we saw the dynamics of the group completely changed. Because governance can only build so much, right? Can bring things together, but it will not sustain collaboration in any true meaningful way. The feeling that you have that your presence is going to change decisions, is going to change the way the room respects you, and the larger issue at hand, that is really what, in my opinion, will sustain collaboration. And therefore, if you really want to use communication to influence, you really need to deliberately create these spaces for that exchange to happen.
Yes, I mean, hear you fully. I think for us too, and Saamuhika Shakti, we actually have a WhatsApp group. It seems like the most accessible thing. And we have these newsletters, internal newsletters, monthly updates that we do to curate these stories and share internally, and to be able to appreciate and just have a platform for recognition. And it goes a long way for these smaller stories also to like rise up, bubble up, right? Otherwise, it just gets overlooked. It's just not visible, as you said, but very important points. And what I'm hearing is from internal communication from everybody, what has talked here about is how we have to definitely not leave it to chance. We have to be intentional, we have to be deliberate, and we have to also look at differences, everybody's equal access to these platforms to be able to share their stories. I think that is what is most important. I think when everybody feels that they are recognized and when they have a voice, then that goes to ownership too, and that's the real change that we want to see, of course. Okay, that's on internal, I think, and external communications, of course, equally critically important to take our voices to the larger world out there. Linda, I will start with you. I think, and a lot, unlike many other, unlike many other organizations in impact sector, for H&M Foundation has always seen communications as very strategic. And because of this also, all the partners in Saamuhika Shakti has a communications mandate. It's not very often that we see that in a collective or collaborative, every partner has a mandate saying that you have to communicate about your learnings, about your work to the external world. How did that vision emerge at H&M Foundation? What led to it, and how do you make sure that it translates on ground with all of the collaboratives that you work, and not make it like, not make it feel like it's an imposition?
Yeah, I think for us, since our inception in 2013, communications has always been at the forefront of what we do, because we've always earmarked funds for our partners to drive communications efforts alongside other interventions. And that's not about visibility or just storytelling, it's about changing systems. Because, if we want to influence at scale and drive big change, doing good in your own program is basically not enough. You need to share knowledge and spread the message and so on. So, and really to change systems, you need to challenge current narratives that are also existent around those systems, right? So, and for that, you of course need resources. So that's where we can help. And you also need to value communications expertise. And I think that also is something that we talk a lot about with our partners, that how we look at communication and how that is really a driver for change alongside other interventions. So I think if we look at the collective programs that we run, that's where it becomes even more tricky, because there you are, of course, closest to your own story and your own work and your own contributions. So there, I think that we also really encourage the partners to look at the bigger picture. And we've had conversations around that, how to put collaboration at the forefront of the storytelling. And I think the partners have been absolutely amazing in really doing that. And not only that, but also we can see that they have started to work together and find joint communication projects and synergies between each other and so on. But I think from our end, it's a lot also that giving that mandate, but still also discussing the shared ambition around changing a system and changing how things work. And also how our joint story can really open doors to arenas or platforms that we would not have access to if we only talked about our own contribution and what we're doing individually as organizations. So I think maybe those are the key points for us, really putting collaboration at the forefront and putting also the method out there and sharing not only the success stories, but also we're also constantly challenging ourselves on this, but sharing learnings and what did we learn and what didn't work, and how can we be transparent in that, because that's also helping others to do their work, and also bringing along a scaling and multiplication of things.
to avoid those same mistakes, like don't waste your
Exactly.
time, like a time and effort.
Mm-hmm.
And for the audience also, like when we say that communications is like a very strategic function, I think H&M Foundation has a big communications team. You have, and for Saamuhika Shakti too, I mean, the way that you have also communicated that to us, we have two people, we have two people working on communications at Saamuhika Shakti. I have a colleague Ekta as well. So that itself is just gives you a number, like a visibility into how critical we think the role of communications is in collaboratives or sharing our learnings and internal and external, taking our voice to the external world.
Definitely.
Taking on from Linda, Sahana, to you, she talked about budgets and expertise. How do you see that play out at RN, Rohini, Nilekani Philanthropies, with you and the work about budgets and making sure that there is some, and that it's important to invest in communications?
Yeah. So I've written a piece on this for IDR where it was kind of an appeal to Indian funders to look at communications and invest in it, both as a capacity and as a culture, which is what Linda and you spoke about, why communications internally within each of our organizations need a function, need a thinking, need an approach. In India, not many funders give unrestricted grants, which allow organizations to use the funding for organizational development, for communications, for building their internal muscles. And very even fewer have something called capacity building grants. There are a handful. There are 4 or 5, which includes us, which includes ATE Chandra, Forbes Foundation, and a few. But what we realized that even though we give a majority of our grants are unrestricted and multi-year, we did a survey as part of our annual impact report learning, which revealed that 30% of the organizations we support utilize more than 50% of the unrestricted grants for anything that is non-programmatic, which means that they continue to use the grants that we are giving, which they can use for hiring or for training or for building their OD requirements. They don't use that. They continue to use it for programs. And a handful of them, in fact, used 100% of the unrestricted grants for programs alone, which basically kills the spirit of an unrestricted grant. While I know that in the, like you mentioned, in the last 7 odd years, there are more organizations, kind of, agencies or partners helping NGOs tell their story better. What continues to be a gap is that the internal comms capacity is still lacking. People struggle to hire strong communications team. There are the founders are often the core spokespersons. Comms team is also research team, also advocacy team, also wearing multiple hats. So I think the appeal here is mainly to funders, because that's where we love to start. Is to kind of think about what is the role that we can play to change this landscape in India. I think for what we have learned is that we need to start with capacity building grants, because for comms to be strong, your strategy needs to be strong, your leadership needs to be strong, your second line needs to be strong. So how do we start with capacity building grants that help them build all of these muscles, which in turn then allows the organization to craft a story better, to articulate better, and to have a clearer narrative. Now, under that, at RNP, we are calling out something called storytelling grants, where we are giving these grants to NGOs that we support and we think have the ability to amplify their story. We give this amount, we give this grant, and tell them you have to strictly use it only for external communications or for building your internal storytelling muscles. So we've seen that over the last 3-4 years, people have used it to hire a strategist to come up with a good strategy, or they've got an agency on board, or they've got equipments like cameras, because they have storytellers internal, but who can just go about and shoot stories. They've joined courses, or they've done exhibitions. We have an organization in an active access to justice space who've done a theater performance with our prison within the prison reform space, and held an event with an art exhibition as well as a theater performance. So that is the second one. I think the third one is to kind of support different vehicles of communications, which is to, like, for example, Rain Matter has supported this NGO, which is also our partner, called Civis, to create something called Climate Voices. And they have given them, it has a report in multiple languages. It has an audio repository of people impacted by climate change across India. And there are multiple such examples. A.T. Chandra has done that with Vidhi, which is a legal which is again in the justice space, to kind of look at research communication, because they do a lot of research reports. How do you, engagingly communicate the findings of reports rather than just put out a 300-page report out there, right? So whether it's partner event grants, because partners do want to do events, but it costs money. So where's that money coming from? Collaboration grants is another way where you could, if you think that within your network of partners that you support, are there 5 people who can come together and share something or run an event or create something new? And lastly, I think, is to sponsor courses or learning offerings. If I were to tie up with BBC Media and say that, hey, which is the conversation which is pending, to say, would you run a campaign for our old partners in the climate and environment space, right? Like, can we engage, because that cost cannot be underwritten. I need somebody to underwrite that, and funders are the right people to come there, because that will help them build the field. So yeah. I think there is a lot of things that the funders can do, along with what NGOs kind of, whether it's platforms like SSIR or IDR, kind of surfacing these stories so that we can all learn from this collectively.
Yes, I mean, fully agree with you. I think once they have this muscle built in, like once these, like even when the budgets get over, there is a learning that has happened and which they can continue with for a really, really long time. I think, and and it's just benefits the organization, continues to benefit the organization for, well past the budgets or when the program or initiative has run its course. Varinder, coming to you, and it's a completely different lens, but this is a great question, I think, because of the work that BBC Media Action has done, in Bangalore, very specifically to how do you sustain and center the authentic voice of the communities in your storytelling, right? And making sure that, while centering those voices, it's authentic and it will influence decision making. I think it'd be great to hear from BBC Media Action's experience and how do you do that?
Sure, Zibi. Thanks for that question. But before I come to that, after hearing from Sahana, Vivek, Linda on the focus on, communication, internal communication, I think I just have to say it's great to have funders like this in the room. First of all, looking at the passion for comms, it's great because that's not something you get across. We've worked across many funders. So hats off, first of all, to RNPF and H&M Foundation for bringing that passion for comms, right? And like Vivek said, right, that you build storytelling for each and every on-ground partner. I think that's what Zibi we've tried also for Saamuhika Shakti, right? We've done the storytelling sessions for each and every partner where, Zibi, you, Ekta, and BBC Media Action came together so that we could build that muscle for each and every partner. So just wanted to mention that before coming now to your question, because it's been a, great discussion to also see, where we've done some things right and, where we need to build more, because a collective is not just a shared WhatsApp group, right? We want to make the collective all about coordination and talking about each and every voice. Coming to your question on authentic voices from the ground, I think I have to say BBC Media Action's one of the core values that we stand by is our audience is at the heart of everything we do. So I think having that value as one of our 6 values that is defining us, it really helps. It's not something that's coming as an added thing to us. We treat our audience as our co-creators, not as our subjects. And so, just as an example, when we created Wash the Dabba, which became a movement, which, won a lot of awards now, it started with us being in the field and asking the community of waste pickers on, what are their challenges and what is that one challenge that they face the most, where we could come in and help, where we could take it back to the community and, community could do something which could help them. I think we heard them. And of course, it was not the only thing that they told us. So from everything else that came from the community, but that was our starting point, then going back to the drawing board and then, understanding where is that intersection of a simple doable action, which is also going to make a big impact in, what we were trying to do, which is changing the perception of the waste pickers in Bangalore, but also, building that interconnectedness between the waste pickers and the Bengaluru citizens. So I think it was very important to do it right, and comms can show, I think, the best return on investment when it affects the decision making. So when it affects decision making across levels. So we were also very conscious that, it's an easy task for the citizens to do, but also something which is easy for, maybe to be picked up at the policy level, right? So we've seen that with Got Old Clothes, for example, where, with the push from on-ground partners as well, from Hasrudala, as well as, KEF, and then us coming in with the social media intervention, we saw that, the urban body has also picked up, and now segregating old clothes has become a thing that's been taken up at the dry waste collection centers. So I think, the first thing is, I think keeping the community at the center is very, very important. And secondly, I think being mindful of we were very, very mindful that we keep dignity first in all our storytelling. We did not want people's sympathy. We did not want any, blame shifting or any patronizing content. We wanted waste pickers to be seen as people with skill, people who are contributing to your cities. So we avoided any kind of narratives that were not talking about, how you show respect to them with the work that they do. So that, I think, was everything that we did was very rooted in that. And lastly, I would just say that, it's very important in a story to also have the element of so what. So, you can change feelings, but it's also very important to, change a decision, change an action, right? So, when we told the people of Bangalore to wash your dabbas before they reach the waste pickers, and how it helps the environment as well as helps build dignity for, somebody who's keeping your city clean, I think it was always very clear that storytelling has to lead into, some kind of an action and a big impact. So I think I'll stop there. Yeah, thanks.
No, and I think that storytelling was very effective. Like we have seen from the research that you have done post the campaign too, and just from anecdotal evidence that the waste pickers themselves have shared that the dubbers are actually coming back clean. To see that in action, that pre and post the campaign, that they are seeing that difference is amazing. So fantastic job there to drive those narrative change right from where the community itself wanted these messages to go out. And as you said, it's also gone into policy with respect to textile waste. And I know there was an order saying that, the DWCCs should be, people should give it to the DWCCs to recycle their old clothes responsibly. Thank you for that. Vivek, coming to you, and a very communications, like how do you support collaboratives when, move beyond just publishing reports or just giving those status updates and saying that, hey, this is the output of this is what we achieved, right? But how do you move them to shaping narratives? Like, it's about influencing the ecosystem. How do you get them to that level of when, the mindset is just like, okay, we have done our work, here is the report, it talks about it.
Yeah, that's the comfort zone for all social sector players. But I get to that, I just want to build on what Sahana said, and I think Varinder touched upon it as well. It's music to my ears when I hear a funder talk about, setting aside funds very specifically for communication. I know it's happening in pockets, but I think a lot more needs to happen. Many more people need to sort of, take in on this. But two elements that I want to add to that we sort of need to find space to have these conversations on is about, the importance of what the communication is, because very often it's about, okay, let's put 5 posts out there, get like 3 media stories done, and that seems like that's great communication, right? And I think we need to stop that and get people to really understand what will create, as Varinder just touched upon, right? What will happen because of me putting those stories out? So what? It might be the most evocative story, but what is it going to result in is something I feel as part of the capacity building work we need to sort of support people to understand. And the second is, I think, long-term, focus on communication, because communication is not going to show you results overnight. And there is a pressure I see from all the work that we've done to show results very quickly. And unfortunately, no behavior change communication can show results overnight, right? So with that context, I'll come to the reports. Like I said, yes, comfort zone for everyone. Even right now, I've been given 10 stories with no context, no background information, and said, let's put an annual report together. Okay. I was sitting and rewriting the whole thing for them. So the honest answer is, I don't think reports can deliver beyond a certain point unless you're able to leverage those reports in a very structured manner. And by that I mean I would look at it at three levels, right? So level one is, yes, your documentation, right? You record what happened, why it happened, all of that. It's largely a documentation of what we did. But even there, what I largely witness is a very tactical record of what has been done. If I give an example, we were working at one collaborative in the edtech space. All they wanted to document was, did the child log into the device? How much time they spent? Nothing beyond it. And we had the funders actually talking about it, saying, listen, just tell us at the end of 1 year, what were these results? And I had to fight back. I said, listen, that's not where the magic sauce is. We need to really go and understand when they log in, what is the child actually experiencing and doing there. So after a lot of back and forth, I said, just allow us to send a traveling storyteller. We're just going to place ourselves in the houses of the children or their schools and just see what comes out of it, right? And I think what we documented in that process was far richer than just saying, a kid logged in for 20 minutes every day and did something. So if the quality of documentation also, I think there is significant scope for us to improve. Unfortunately, most social sector players stop at the documentation level. The second level, which is even more important, which is the narrative building, right? Which is, okay, this data is there. So what does it mean? How is it going to change the ecosystem? Why should anybody reading this be affected by it? Is not an area I still see enough attention being paid to. Let alone the third most important lever, which is the driving of conversations or the advocacy that you want your work to result in, right? There's almost no effort being taken to sort of double click on that. What we have been trying to get people to sort of appreciate is, once you've been able to put your report together, can we pick up 2 or 3 real interesting narrative streams, what I call, like provocative documents, right? It really drives for a conversation. So if you want to change policy because of it, you want to sort of change funder behavior around it, how do you really structure that? What implication does it have on policy, the work that's being done, society, all of that? In very simple, plain language, not complex research, academic language, which is another challenge that we sometimes face with all of this. So I think that is where, if we can sort of work with all partners involved to be able to use a fundamental requirement like a report and elevate it to this level so it can be actually used for a lot of meaningful purposes that impact business outcomes, social outcomes. I think that will be tremendously beneficial.
Yes, for sure. I think all of this, the what like Linda and Sahana and Varinder are saying is, I think even for external comms as well, I mean, you have to build that capacity, and to build that capacity and to have that muscle, I mean, the funding ecosystem has also to understand that like in the impact system, as in the corporate sector, you have to have dedicated roles set aside for communication. There should be budgets that are set aside, which allows those people to build that muscle internally and to be able to drive those narratives. I mean, and it's not just for advocacy related, even just to be able to share their voice. And I mean, communication externally is also to build those networks that we need to continue our work. I think those are very, very important.
If I may add a small point to that, because I think it really bothers me, is communication needs to be paid its due respect first.
Here, here,
That's
here.
yeah, it goes to it's delegated into the marketing division and all of that, and then sort of trickles down as like something that just definitely is a sort of a tick box element, right? But if it is to sort of aim to be a business contributor, it has to be a management discussion. It has
Yeah,
to be championed by leaders.
yeah,
It can't be delegated to a communication officer to deliver at the end of the day.
yeah. That's a perfect segue into the next round of questions that I want to get into. I mean, if it cannot be delegated, if it's like it has to be really inbuilt into the program itself, and that's communication is a strategy, not just like a support function, right? How do we make that possible? Um, Vivek, like I'll start with you itself here, like how do you when you're doing for collectives, right? Like you talked about making sure all of those processes and moving from documentation to actually narrative building and using that to share your story. But how do you do that for a collective? When you do for a single organization, I think we all know it. I mean, it's easy to do it for a single organization, especially coming from a communications background. All of those things are known. But when you come to a collaborative, you talked about working with 18 partners. How do you drive that shared narrative? What do you do?
Yeah, tough, one good question. Tough to respond to it. You know, as you rightly said, it's easy when you're sort of doing it for a single organization, right? But when you have multiple cultures, multiple voices, multiple approval systems to be able to deliver this, the complexity is very different. Also, what adds even more complexities is multiple definitions of what's going to be success.
Yeah.
That really also sort of adds in a lot of things. So I feel, in a collective, you need to stop focusing about designing messages, but you really need to focus on designing the infrastructure or the system through which these messages get delivered. And sort of if I lay down in my head, I normally think about four ways you sort of have to structure that system. One is, I think, which we touched upon very early on in the conversation, which is a shared narrative architecture, right? And that's the conflict always between the individual identity of the organization versus the collective shared reason why we're all coming together. So how do you really structure that? Not as a tagline, not as sort of a rallying slogan, but something that's deeply ingrained in the way we function. That's really the thread that connects us to how we do our work. That's one. The second is, I think, a very clear decision tree for communication, right? Who owns, like I remember in one collective, we had clear tracks called out. There were leaders for those tracks. They were given a certain pattern in which decisions had to be made, how it would sort of process through for approvals to happen and stuff like that. Was beautiful because I thought it was amazing to see how people started working together, even when there was dissent, how it was discussed, recognized, respected, and you moved further, right? So that's the second piece. The third is, which I touched upon earlier on, is also the contribution visibility protocol, right? How do you really attribute who has really delivered to this in any meaningful manner? Because I think these are all in a single organization, it's very clear, who's going to do it. But in a collaborative, I think, how do you really give credit to who has really contributed? It can't be about, hey, we as a collaborative have done this. It has to be in the collaborative, so and so has made a significant contribution. And those nuances, I think, sometimes get lost in these things. And the last piece, I think, is building a strong communication rhythm. About campaigns and all of that, but it's about what kind of consistent low frequency communication touch points can we build so that it's built over in a consistent manner over a long period of time,
Yeah.
right? So some of the things that you spoke about, which is all great, like a newsletter that you may sort of use to capture this, WhatsApp that you may sort of be able to do this, quarterly videos that you might do, a convening that you might sort of put in place. Rhythm builds recognition, in my opinion, right? And I think when you do that to a great extent, you're able to sort of leverage member credibility while maintaining that individual identity that everyone brings to the table to deliver to this.
Important. I think just want to add on to what you said. So collective also has like multiple actors that you said. They have their own ways of communicating what is success, but some of the maybe members in the collective are really well known. How do you leverage those credibility also in a collective? Have you seen that? Just any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, because then sometimes it can sort of, they end up taking the limelight. So it's a question of balancing. Say, for example, they may anchor what work is being done, but you may actually allow somebody else to speak about it collectively. The two of you sort of present it jointly. We've seen some of these things, and I've seen it being done with a lot of graciousness. And I think it takes a lot from a leader to be able to sort of let the podium be given to somebody else, or to share space with somebody else, right? Who may have contributed, even though it may have been a small contribution, but it's a significant contribution. And maybe they're not well known. So you create, and I think that's beautiful, because I see that it comes naturally to a lot of people in the community, to be able to sort of share the limelight. And I remember this very interesting analogy somebody said. It's like when we're in a collective, we're like a constellation of stars. Any star that doesn't shine well is invisible to the eye, right? So we really need to shine the light on everyone. So that's how I would sort of manage that.
Okay. All right. Great. I think that's also a great segue to Varinder, because Varinder, as a partner, when you designed communications in Saamuhika Shakti, I think you BBC Media Action took a very conscious decision not to put your name out there. And you have launched a campaign which is completely separate from every identity in the collective. It's like an invaluables campaign. What led to those decisions that you are really you're putting the work out there, and you are taking that step back? And how did that, how has that thought process evolved, and what are you seeing now?
Thanks, Zibi, for that. Because when Vivek was talking, I felt like jumping in and telling him, we did this, we did exactly this. So yeah, this was a very deliberate strategy, as you know. The objective for us was public trust. The objective for us was to take the waste pickers out of this shroud of invisibility, for them to be seen as invaluables, and that's where the invaluables came from. And again, like when I was answering your first question as well on the authenticity of communication, right? I think it again boils down to, when we are talking to our audience, if we confuse them with Saamuhika Shakti, BBC Media Action, what we do, what our work is about, I think that's where we just lose the plot. Yeah. So we were very clear that for us, what was important was we're trying to build public trust. We're trying to help the waste pickers, and we want them to be seen as not invisibles, but invaluables, right? For the work that they do. So I think building a single neutral campaign that helped us reduce this friction with the public. They could engage with this very simple idea and action then, because we want to tell them about wash the dabba, because that's how you help the invaluables. Bring your old clothes to DWCC centers, because that's how you help the invaluables. So I think building it all around that single idea was very important. And that's why keeping all the other brands aside, it also really helped, the other partners. It made it easier for them to then share and amplify the message, because that's again, very intentional and deliberate, because that's more important than, again, being a Saamuhika Shakti in that case. So it really helped us amplify the message by keeping it singular. And lastly, I think it kept the focus on what we were doing, behavior change and building dignity for the waste pickers. So I think sometimes for the organization to step back and give the platform to the waste pickers, to the community, bringing them to the center, and then thinking is of course very, very important. Which is not to say that we did not talk about our brand and Saamuhika Shakti in lots of learning papers, right? So it's again very important that when you're talking about places where you're building evidence about the work that's been done by Saamuhika Shakti, being done by BBC Media Action, the learning products, the reporting, the funder, communication. That's where, of course, we were Saamuhika Shakti, we were BBC Media Action. But it's when we were talking to the audiences, we were always invaluables. So I think all I'll say is that, sometimes the strongest comms choice is not to think of your own logo, but, be visible through the outcomes that you're creating. So
very, very, very important point. And I think that's also why, like, everybody in the partnership, in the collective also has embraced the word invaluables. It's become our campaign rather than just just one partner's campaign. So very important point. I think that was necessary. I think coming to you, Linda, I think because she talked collaboration, like how do you, like what will it take for communication to be seen as collaborative infrastructure, right? Rather than just like, when you're talking about governance and coming in from those guidelines. But in your opinion, like who needs to be convinced? Is it funders so that then they will create that space and make sure that is there? Or is it anchors or partners? How does that roll out?
Yeah, so I think we're all clear on that communication is often treated as something that you add at the end of kind of when the real work is done. That's when you add communication and you talk about what was done, right? But that doesn't work because you have to include it in the setup of the whole collaboration. And I think looking at who needs to be convinced, it's all three groups because it needs to be funded intentionally from the beginning, and only then can it be also included in the design and the setup of the project itself. And you can also plan for how you kind of you catch the learnings along the way and how you communicate about that and who you involve also in the conversation. Is it the multipliers that you want to reach in the end? Maybe you can include them in the beginning and kind of work with them together throughout the project to get them involved at the start. But I think also it needs to be looked at as a shared responsibility within the collective. The communication is also something that you should kind of try to own together, but also maybe even more importantly as a joint opportunity. So I think that for funders, they need to be convinced because they set the incentives, they set the budgets, and they can influence how it's viewed, if it's part of the theory of change or if it's more of an add-on that you do in the end. And for the anchors or backbones, those are the ones, I think we've been discussing this a lot, that they are setting the architecture of the collective itself and how internal communication will work and how that will influence mandate and decision making, and also the shared identity that we talked about. And for the partners, I think it's also super important to have them on board because collective storytelling really requires that trust and the opportunity to look kind of beyond your own brand and see the bigger picture and how what you're doing together is the interesting story that you can tell and that you also can share with others to influence and to have replication and multiplication of your work.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, fully aligned with you that all funders and anchors and everybody needs to come together. And you talked about a collective storytelling can only happen when all of us come together. I think that's the question also that I wanted to ask Sahana. When we had talked earlier, you talked about collaborative communication, right? If we are working collectively, why shouldn't we communicate collectively too? Here at the backbone too, and the journey of Saamuhika Shakti, we also have looked at how we are all individually communicating, but over the course of the year, since we are working together, we need to be able to communicate together as well. How can we make that happen? I think you touched upon that earlier when you said that, making those platforms come together, making maybe 5 groups or grants, giving a grant so people come together. But can you expand on that a little bit more, Sahana?
Yeah, thanks. So for example, again, within one of our portfolios where we know that, 5 different organizations have worked with children in prisons, but they would have worked at different intersections. We gave a collaboration grant to 5 of them, one grant to this group of 5 organizations to do an event on Juvenile Justice Act, which came into India in 86, on this Jan 26th. So one of the things that we've learned with collaborations is that in collaborations, A plus B is not AB, it is C, right? So you're not here as individuals to kind of then find a common platform to tell your story, but you're here to build on the strengths of each other. So while aligned messaging is common, what I think truly shared communication platforms should kind of overcome the fear of brand dilution or the loss of visibility that we've all kind of touched upon, or reputational risk, and then come together to create something new that you couldn't have otherwise done on your own. We have another example in the climate space, which is Coexistence Consortium. These are organizations, they're individuals, researchers, they're biologists, they're anthropologists, conservationists. They have in-depth experience and understanding of the coexistence space and the political and complexity of this space. Now, what they come together is to run public campaigns. So they did a huge public campaign in Bangalore, with each of their strengths surfacing in different parts, but they also came together for more public policy conversations. They came together as a unit. They run a fellowship where each of them act as mentors, because then, given their geographical spread, they can have mentors in different parts of the country. They have a common platform where they write, and they look at all of that. So how do you is there a way to shift from ownership of an idea to stewardship of a narrative or of a larger change? I think that's the ethos in which we look at it. And we've seen that translate with joint knowledge hubs, because I think learning is another big, we see in the sector research being done on the same topic again and again, or data being collected again and again with, so how can we have joint knowledge hubs or pooled media lists? We've, individually organizations have reached out to media in different times, or co-branded campaigns or common data dashboards that a single actor is not capable of doing otherwise, or might be time consuming. Again, we've spoken about this, having a secretariat or a neutral backbone organization who can take a step back and able to look at the larger picture and not from an individual organization point of view, is really helpful in collaboratives or coalitions. And however, how much ever we would like to say that it's the collective over the individual, attribution norms are very important to kind of have that in place and recognized right in the beginning, to allow for value to come to the individual organizations, but at the same time, the collective to be bigger and more valuable that you wouldn't have got otherwise. Having those conversations also help.
Yeah. I mean, I think when we having those processes and frameworks and all of that fully charted out at the early on, and it will reduce a lot of miscommunication, or those gaps that can come up, and that is what happens, right? I know we just gotten over. We are like at 3:08. We have about about 7 minutes for Q&A. I do definitely want to create space for that. So let's look at any questions that we can take if they have not been answered in the chats already. Is there? Yeah. Shruti, are you able to share those questions? Yeah. Until that happens, yeah. Yes. I think, how is impact measured for behavior change communication initiatives in multi-partner collectives where incentives and power are uneven? How do you design communications so the backbone can stay neutral enough to hold trust but still push for decisions and momentum? I think, Varinder, do you want to take that first part of it?
Sure, I can. Quite a loaded question.
Yeah.
But yes, when we are measuring communication, it's of course never easy. I think for us, what's important is looking at it not like one metric. It's like looking at the behavior change ladder, When I say ladder, it's almost like, when you look at brand equity, brand recall, I'm, in the social sector as well, sometimes you need to look at that ladder of, starting from reach and recall, getting also into the perceived norms, and which is what makes our job more difficult, because what you're measuring is not whether a product has been bought or not. What you're measuring is, have you made a difference at a perceived norms level, and then go into the behavior level, then look at sustained change as well. And of course, that also means, investment at every step of monitoring, impact assessment, and understanding, what's the difference. So I think measuring what changes before the behavior is also as important as measuring the behavior itself, as well as what is sustained after, the behavior change. So I think that ladder is very, very important. Have I answered the question?
Yes, I think so. I think the next one is, how do you design communication so the backbone can stay neutral enough to hold trust, but still push for decisions and momentum? I think being from the backbone organization, Sattva, I think maybe then, if I can just add like a point there. I think for us, when we were designing communications for Saamuhika Shakti, it was very clear that we should have processes and frameworks in place to allow for everybody, every partner in the collective to have a voice and to be able to share. So creating those processes and frameworks, we have like a touch point. We have communications representatives at each of the organizations, because that was something that our funder initiated, H&M Foundation, very clearly said, every partner in the collective should communicate. So there's comms representatives. So we have touch points, very regular touch points. Every 2 weeks we meet. And even for the governance is also very clear. There are steering committees that happen. There are working groups that happen. There are monthly touch points with all of the partners. There are all partner calls that happen. And there's also physical meetings, because, it's not always, online meetings are great, and calling and having those, calls are good. But unless you meet in person, there are different synergies that can happen, when you just share about your own journey, personal journeys. So all of these platforms that one has to create, and very intentionally designing those shared spaces for learning, for capacity building. Varinder, you mentioned about like us doing a storytelling workshop together for the rest of the partners, because in a collective, reality is that not everybody has the same capacity for comms. Their journeys are sometimes we in Saamuhika Shakti, we are 100-year-old organization to a 15-year-old organizations to decades, and sometimes new. So it's the capacities and the expertise within the organizations differed. So a lot of capacity building workshops, shared learning spaces, and very importantly, the shared language, having those documents and collaterals ready, and creating those and iterating it as we go along. Those were the very important to ensure that everybody has that space and the safe space. I think like we had talked about it, to be able to bring those conflicts for conflict resolution. All of these are important to be able to surface any potential conflicts that might arise later, to be able to build together and collectively. I think those are some of our learnings. But Vivek, if you want to, as somebody who has helped the collaborators, anything you want to add in there?
I think you summed it up well, Zibi. Nothing more. Yeah, I think as long as you sort of put these guardrails in place, and I think the intent, right? At the end of the day, the intent behind how you're doing this, and I've seen many collaborators, depending on how the anchor views this and what discussions have happened, these things can vary significantly. So intent is where I would sort of park my views.
Yeah, I think for us also, I think transparency is what leads to trust, right? I think it's important that there is transparency in all that we do. Everybody has a visibility into that, and creating that shared platform, then it leading to trust. Trust it's a long process to build trust. We all coming together with different mandates. Sahana, Linda, any last thoughts to add to that? All right. Okay, I think we are also just a minute left. So, but then I guess we will wrap it up. I will hand over.
Sorry, Zibi, I want to just add one small thing, as before we wrap up. I think the other very important piece, and it's not related to the question you asked, but just sort of that sort of strikes very strongly for me is, it's unfortunate, but it's the truth, that it's usually people like us who are sitting, in these comfortable seats, who feel we can tell a community story.
Of course.
And I feel we need to consciously flip that, to be able to give them the voices and give them the due respect that's necessary. Because I believe, and I'm working with another large NGO here, a lot of practices in organic agriculture that they've been trying to introduce, the learnings didn't come from the experts who could talk about organic agriculture. It came from the women who are actually doing it on the ground. And because we were able to document their experiences over a period of time, I think the impact on the outcome that we were able to see was far superior.
Definitely.
He's sitting here inside trying to design a great story, a communication strategy. So I feel if we can shift that, I think it'll be an important thing. It takes a lot of effort, and I think it's glad to see that there are funders who want to champion all of that. But maybe that's a parting note for us to reflect on.
Very important. And like I think from being a practitioner, like from corporate comms to the social impact sector, like over the last 6 years, I think Sahana also touched upon that. What I find now is like I started at Sattva, actually. My impact journey, social impact journey started at Sattva. I mean, what I've seen is also like an evolution. We're still at emergent in India, I would say, but there's lots of progress. There's progress definitely in making sure, like in centering comms also in the impact sector, to be able to share their stories and to share the stories from the community, to allow those platforms for the community also to surface those voices. I think very I'm seeing that, and it's heartening to see that. And that's also what Varinder said about, we have how we surface that story and like that ask that we can from the community. All right, we are a minute out of time, but hopefully everybody's here, and then I'll pass it on to Shruti to share. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Zibi, for facilitating a wonderful conversation. Linda, one second, there's a bit of an echo. We're sitting in the same room. Zibi, you've muted yourself? Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Linda, Varinder, Sahana, and Vivek. I have personally taken so many notes from this conversation. Some of the incredible phrases that I heard, deliberate design, provocative reporting. So thank you so much. I think this was really, really insightful. And thanks to everyone else who joined this discussion. And thanks for taking out the time on a busy Wednesday afternoon to be a part of this conversation. This is a webinar that's a part of a 5-part webinar series that we're doing on collective action. There are 2 more that are coming up, and one is on measuring what matters, which is also another complex challenge that most collectives face. And the last one is how do you kind of unlock capital that supports collective action. Stay tuned for more updates. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll also be sharing notes and resources with all the participants who registered for the webinar. Thank you so much.